Emergency powers are sometimes necessary, but if they become normalized, the constitutional guardrails bend and then eventually break. On Constitution Day, that's the question before us. When crisis demands speed, how do we keep the presidency constitutional?
Welcome to the Civic Brief with Dr. Isaiah Ike Wilson III, where complex issues meet everyday lives. Now, let's begin.
Welcome to the Civic Brief. I'm Dr. Ike Wilson. Today we're asking, what happens when the pressures of modern crises, things like cyber, climate, disinformation, economic shocks, push the presidency beyond what the framers imagined? And what do we, as citizens, need to watch for if the guardrails of democracy are to hold? When we talk about the presidency under pressure, no theory looms larger than the so-called unitary executive. It begins in the Constitution's simple grant, quote, "The executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America," end quote. Now, Alexander Hamilton, one of our framers in Federalist 70, praised this kind of unity as the key to, as he put it, decision, activity, secrecy, and dispatch. One president, one chain of command, one place for the people to fix blame or credit. But here's the paradox, and here's the problem in the paradox. The very energy Hamilton prized can, if unchecked, again, let me say that, if unchecked, it can edge towards the tyranny that James Madison, that other framer, feared. And so, for more than 2 centuries, the courts, Congress, and presidents themselves have wrestled with a question. How much control does the president really have over the sprawling executive branch? Now, let's cover some case precedent and get a better sense from an American political historical context. In Myers versus the United States, 1926, the court said the president could remove a postmaster at will. That broadened the power rooted in this idea of increased unity in the executive. But then just 9 years later, in a decision called Humphrey's Executor, 1935, that same court pulled back, allowing Congress to shield members of independent commissions like the FTC with for-cause protections. Now let's fast forward to Morrison v. Olson, 1988. The court upheld an independent counsel's insulation from executive power. This marked a low tide for unitary executive. But then the tide rose again. Free Enterprise Fund versus the PCAOB, otherwise called the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. That's a mouthful. 2010, which struck down double layer protections. Then in CELA law versus CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, 2020, and Collins v. Yellen in 2021, the court ruled that single director agencies cannot be fully insulated from executive fiat, from executive power, narrowing Humphrey's to its facts in strengthening presidential removal power. Meanwhile, Youngstown versus Sawyer, 1952, remains the counter pole. Justice Jackson reminding us that presidential power is at its lowest ebb whenever acting against Congress, even in an emergency. Now, layered on top of this are recent administrative law rulings. West Virginia versus the EPA, curbing regulatory action without explicit congressional authorization. SEC versus Zarkesi, expanding jury trial rights, and Loper Bright versus Raimondo, ending the Chevron doctrine. What's the net effect of all this, folks, right? A paradoxical presidency, stronger over bureaucrats, but at the same time hemmed in by courts and statutes. More unitary in theory, yet more contested in practice. Now comes the test in real time, our time. President Trump's second administration. On day one, he reinstated and expanded what's called Schedule F, a reclassification that makes thousands of policy influencing civil servants easier to hire and also easier to fire. His argument, align the bureaucracy with presidential direction. What do his critics say? They call it a loyalty purge, the death of a neutral civil service. And then came August 2025, the attempted removal of Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. The White House claimed mortgage improprieties as cause. Cook refused to resign. Legal scholars were and still are stunned. Markets rattled. The Federal Reserve Act allows removal only for cause, a protection historically read very narrowly. If courts permit Trump to succeed, and it does seem that the Supreme Court most recently has given him the win on this, it would pierce one of the last bastions of economic independence. Let's think about the risk here. The stakes aren't abstract. Investors worldwide treat Fed independence as a guarantee that the United States monetary policy won't be a political football. Breach that wall and we risk an economic Saturday night massacre. Capital flight, higher borrowing cost, a destabilized dollar. But the risks go beyond markets. If the Fed can be purged, why not Treasury statistical agencies, or the Congressional Budget Office, or the OMB? Independence has been our buffer against partisan capture. Strip that away, and governance itself tilts toward authoritarian drift. Unitary executive theory promises accountability and also speed. In compound crises, again, things like cyber attacks, pandemics, disinformation storms, that energy is very, very attractive, but the risks are profound. Eroding expertise, politicizing law enforcement, destabilizing markets, and normalizing executive fiat over process. This is the presidency under maximum pressure. Hamilton's energy weaponized. Madison's warnings revived. Now, whether the courts or Congress step in will determine if we are witnessing a constitutional stress test or a constitutional unraveling. And that brings us to the civic question. If presidents push the boundaries of power, who enforces those guardrails? Not just courts, not just Congress, but us. Citizens who know the Constitution, who can tell the difference between necessity and overreach, and who demand accountability before it's too late. Dr. Mina Bose reminded us that the Office of Management and Budget itself, once just a simple technical bureau, became central to policymaking. That, my friends, is a quiet reminder. The architecture of executive power expands, not only in war, but also in paperwork. The real test, then, isn't just bold action. It's whether constitutional process is honored even under pressure. Guardrails are not self-enforcing. Congress must assert its oversight. Courts must adjudicate. But citizens, too, carry responsibility. Civic literacy is itself a constitutional guardrail. When we understand the difference between legitimate emergency action and lazy shortcuts, we give presidents legitimacy in the necessary cases, and we push back when power slides into habit. In the compound age, process is not luxury, it's survival. The wise way says, integrate defense, diplomacy, development, and commerce. Presidents who widen the aperture beyond military or executive fiat power keep their actions bounded and their legitimacy intact. The citizens who see the connections demand more than just slogans. They demand stewardship, transparent stewardship. Travelers, if this conversation sharpened your civic lens, subscribe to Compound Security Unlocked, to this podcast, the Civic Brief. Again, join our travelers community and explore more at Wilson Wise Consulting. Together, we can defend the guardrails of our democracy. This Constitution Day, let's remember, the presidency was built for energy, but also for restraint. Energy without accountability is tyranny. Restraint without energy is paralysis. The Republic requires both. This is the Civic Brief, and I'm Dr. Ike Wilson. Until next time, for Nation Not Self.
Thanks for tuning into the Civic Brief. Got questions, insights, or ideas? Join us at thecivicbrief.com to continue the dialogue. Subscribe, share, and be part of shaping the future, one brief at a time.